It's important to keep in mind that like when the petrodollar system has been, the standard for keeping the dollar the global, or reserve currency, the US has gone to war and like killed millions of people to defend that. It's important to keep in mind that like when the petrodollar system has been, the standard for keeping the dollar the global, or reserve currency, the US has gone to war and like killed millions of people to defend that.
Whitney Webb, an experienced journalist and researcher, has been uncovering government secrets since 2016. As a former senior investigative reporter for Mint Press News and current writer and podcast host for Unlimited Hangout, Webb delves into the murky waters of global finance. In one of her revealing videos, she discusses a critical, yet often overlooked, aspect of U.S. economic policy, the petrodollar system. In the 1970s, after the U.S. abandoned the gold standard and the Bretton Woods system collapsed, the American economy faced a potential crisis. The dollar was losing value, and economic instability loomed. However, a strategic and secretive deal with Saudi Arabia under the Nixon administration offered a lifeline. In 1974, U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger brokered an agreement that would have lasting global implications. Saudi oil would be sold exclusively in U.S. dollars. In return, the U.S. promised military protection and technological support. This pact established the petrodollar standard, ensuring that oil, the world's most valuable commodity, was tied to the American currency. The petrodollar system not only stabilized the U.S. economy, but also cemented its financial dominance as other OPEC nations followed Saudi Arabia's lead. Global demand for U.S. dollars surged, reinforcing the dollar's status as the world's primary reserve currency. However, this dominance faced challenges. In 2000, Saddam Hussein of Iraq threatened the system by switching oil sales from dollars to euros. This bold move risked undermining the dollar's supremacy and shifting global economic power. The U.S., under the pretext of eliminating weapons of mass destruction, invaded Iraq in 2003. But the actual reason, many analysts believe the true motive, was to prevent other countries from abandoning the dollar for oil transactions. Similarly, in 2009, Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi proposed a gold-backed African dinar to replace the dollar in African oil sales. His vision of a unified Africa, independent from Western economic control, alarmed the U.S. and its allies. In 2011, during the Arab Spring, NATO, led by the U.S. and France, intervened in Libya. The mission, ostensibly to protect civilians, quickly shifted to regime change, culminating in Gaddafi's violent overthrow. Whitney Webb's analysis suggests that these wars were not merely about disarmament or humanitarian concerns, but were strategic moves to maintain the petrodollar system and, consequently, U.S. global economic dominance. As we bring you more clips from the interview, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel to help us reach more viewers. Don't forget to turn on post notifications to stay updated with our latest content. Share your thoughts and observations in the comments section below. Thank you and enjoy the video.
One of the likely motivations, obviously there's more than one, but one of the key ones in invading Iraq, I would argue, was the fact that Saddam Hussein, not long before the invasion, had started selling oil in euros instead of dollars and made a lot more money, showing by example to other, other OPEC members that they could make more money selling in different currencies than the dollar. And then, of course, you have the case of Libya in 2011, where Gaddafi was trying to move to a gold-backed currency called the dinar and was selling that to African countries, a lot of which either use dollars or they use, French financial stuff. And that's why you had the U.S. and France essentially lead that regime change operation with devastating consequences for Libya, which used to be the safest country in Africa, then became the most dangerous and has been cited as an example of or a reason for why immigration got so out of control in Europe after that point. So there are cases where the U.S. government, or rather U.S. empire, is willing to go to extreme lengths to defend the dollar. So the idea that they would just sit idly by and just let dollarization happen without having some sort of plan in the works especially knowing that they couldn't keep this going indefinitely and that the world was going to move at some point to a post-oil economy. I think it's important to keep in mind that these people have been very serious and played very dirty and created insane instability just to keep the dollar the global reserve currency, because it gives a lot of advantages just to the US. And I fully feel that they intend to keep those advantages, even if it means a different system.
A little bit off the beaten bush. Everybody wants dollars. So there's this conflict where people want dollars. It's a more stable currency than a local currency. Sorry, you lose your welfare. So there's this weird conflict between people who want it, who need it the most, want it, and having more liquidity and access to it. But at the same time, it perpetuates this system.
Yeah.
I don't know how to deal with that conflict.
No, for the average Argentinian, that in some cases, like, this can be a lifeline. Like, I get that, but it's important to look at the big picture here. And the big picture is that countries like Argentina and also Lebanon and several countries throughout the world have been targeted by economic warfare for a very long time. Argentina is a very good example. You could argue it began in the 70s and the 80s, and with the economic policy. I mean, when Argentina was a military dictatorship, some of the financial policies they adopted were completely insane. You had a neoliberal in power during the 90s who was very bad for Argentina, in my opinion, Carlos Menem. And then you had their economic collapse in 2001, which, again, you could argue was a direct consequence of a lot of those policies, both of the dictatorship and of Menem's presidency. And then you have the IMF come in and all these other entities. And what they try and do after the 2001 economic collapse is have Argentina engage in things like debt for land swaps, debt for resources swaps. And this has been going on not just in Argentina, but lots of, most of Latin America, arguably, for a very long time. And it's a resource grab.
Yeah.
And, some of what we allude to in this piece and what we hope to allude to in an upcoming reports and a book is that a lot of the people that I've written about and that Mark's written about and that we've written about together are the engineers of that expressly. And by blowing out Latin American debt in the 80s and 90s, it was a way to basically yoke Latin America to the United States or more broadly, a lot of the transnational economic interests that are based in the United States, like Wall Street banks, for example. They engineered a lot of this, and so the situation in Argentina now didn't just come out of nowhere. And obviously, Argentina's central bank has a lot of the blame, but that also didn't happen in a vacuum. Presidents appointed the heads of the central bank that made those policies. And even someone like Milei, who's railed against the Central Bank of Argentina, put former central bank president in a top post in his cabinet. So these are choices that have been made by politicians. As someone who's been and reported from the ground on Argentina and on Argentinian politics, the corruption there, they just don't even, there's politicians in Argentina that don't even try to hide how corrupt they are. It's just flagrant in some instances in a way like I've never experienced anywhere else in the entire world. So I honestly think that what's happening in Argentina, yes, those people may need stable coins because of the current economic situation, but I think it was engineered to be that way. They were engineered into that position. And who benefits from that? The same people that I would argue created the solution and created the problem. The goal of this is covert dollarization through stablecoins. And dollarization has happened in specific Latin American countries in the past, Ecuador, for example, El Salvador. And what happens then is that when they're dollarized, those countries lose their financial sovereignty. They become dependent on decisions of the Fed, and a lot of consequences come from that. So this is an effort by the same architects of even those instances in Ecuador and El Salvador to essentially foist the same thing on Latin America, but under a more, it doesn't seem like overt dollarization when it's stablecoins that aren't directly connected to the U.S. government, but they are connected directly to the U.S. Treasury system, for example. And then we also have some of these companies that Zappo are connected to, for example, that are also backed by this Endeavor company that is the focus of this piece, like Satellogic, which was also a key focus of our previous article, Debt from Above. And if you look at the board on Satellogic, you have the former head of the Treasury Department, Steve Mnuchin. You have Howard Lutnick of Cantor Fitzgerald, one of the main, people involved in the Treasury system, right? And then you have someone from the Rohatyn Group, and the Rohatyn Group is named for Nick Rohatyn, who basically led the Latin American debt policies of J.P. Morgan throughout the 1980s, netting the bank an insane amount of money and really aggravating the Latin American debt crisis as we know it today. So why are all those people on the board of the satellite company, for example? And why do these people pop up at Zappo? Why are these people that also are, involved in stablecoins like PayPal, for example, with PYUSD, why are they all over Endeavor, the PayPal mafia? I think it's so much that it's very hard to ignore and write it off as a coincidence. So Tether started off with money, right, with the stable coin. And now they're going into satellites and brain chips. Musk is doing brain chips and satellites, and he took over a social network, arguably for the user data. And now he's turning or has made it very explicit his intentions to turn Twitter X into a bank that he hopes to be half of the financial system.
Specifically with how they've started to infiltrate capital markets, try and compare it as best as possible to how they've done the same with, say, the big social media giants, the Twitters, the Facebooks.
Okay, so in the case of like U.S. intelligence, if you go back to the very beginning, and there's even CIA like deputy directors that have said that, it was all Wall Street people at the beginning. It was Wall Street lawyers, it was Wall Street bankers, and since that point, from the genesis of the CIA, there's been revolving doors between CIA and Wall Street that have continued up until today. And really, you could look at the CIA as a public-private enterprise in some sense. It's a public security agency, but it's more or less functioned throughout its history as Wall Street's secret police. That's why its earliest coups, for example, like its first coup in Guatemala, was done on behalf of United Fruit. A major multinational corporation headquartered in the United States, which interestingly enough was later acquired by Leon Black's father and then Leslie Wexner's business mentor.
I know that name.
Yeah. And then you also have, like the coup in Iran, over like Anglo-American oil, like them losing their holdings there. The coup in 1973 in Chile, you can argue it was because of efforts to nationalize copper and all these largely Western mining companies losing out, and then they come in and do a coup and what have you. It's really been symbiotic for some time. And I think, as we moved into the information age, the CIA saw an opportunity. Well, let me back up a little bit. The internet from the very beginning was, it originally started as ARPANET, a project of the Pentagon. And for anyone that really wants to know about that history, I would highly recommend the book Surveillance Valley by Yasha Levine. It was essentially created in Vietnam as a counterinsurgency program. That was the goal of it, by the same people that were involved in things like the Phoenix program, which was the first instance of military intelligence, at least U.S. military intelligence, using databases to come up with names of dissidents and then assassinating them. And a lot of them weren't actually dissidents, like suspected dissidents or neighbors of dissidents and all of this stuff. And then from Phoenix program, it goes, all these CIA-backed dictatorships, like, Pinochet in Chile, for example, Operation Condor, use the exact same system. And they've been building these systems with the internet even before the modern internet as we use it now existed. And so a lot of these there were efforts early on to king-make the companies who would come to dominate the internet. And that has happened. It's just a matter of public record. If you look at the biggest companies in big tech, I've done work about how Facebook was essentially launched as a resurrection of a failed DARPA program called LifeLog by the same person that resurrected the failed DARPA program, Total Information Awareness, one of the most insane surveillance proposals ever in U.S. history, resurrected as Palantir. You can thank Peter Thiel for that, co-founder of PayPal. And a lot of these other companies that have become huge, Google, for example, there's a good article by Nafez Ahmed written on by Insert when he published at Insurge Intelligence called "How the CIA Made Google." If you look at a lot of these companies, you will find intelligence agencies at the beginning. Palantir, I mentioned earlier, took In-Q-Tel money, developed very closely with the CIA. It began at PayPal. It's a PayPal spinoff, Palantir is. Oracle, another huge company in Silicon Valley. Larry Ellison, before he started Oracle, was working on Project Oracle at the CIA on databases, and was the infrastructure for Oracle as we know it now. A lot of these, there's been a lot of symbiosis between intelligence agencies and these big companies for a long time, and they couldn't have done it without venture capital. And that's arguably why the CIA launched In-Q-Tel in the late 90s, because they wanted to become big players in Silicon Valley. Because when you decide, who the kingmakers are, well, there's a lot of things actually to be said about that. So what I mentioned earlier about like total information awareness, this is a program that was just deemed so insane in the early 2000s that essentially every mainstream media publication railed against it, and rights group railed against it. But then when they relaunched the same program essentially as a private entity, as a private sector entity, no one complained. And so the CIA for a long time, and other intelligence agencies, have followed this exact playbook, specifically Israeli intelligence. When you move into the private sector, you can get away with a lot more than you can in the public sector sometimes, depending on what you're trying to do. And so there have been efforts to do that, I would argue, for a very long time. And if you look at how these big tech companies have developed, and, for example, revelations from the Snowden leaks, just like how the extent to which these private companies, how much of your data that they're selling or passing to U.S. intelligence for warrantless surveillance. I mean, they've been collaborators of this for a very, very long time. And I think there really hasn't been enough scrutiny of that. And I would really argue that a lot of these companies operate more often than not as intelligence fronts. And it's kind of gotten to the point, too, where in U.S. specifically, the people behind these very big tech, the biggest of the big tech companies, are also the main donors to the two U.S. political parties.
That's Whitney's expose on the secrets of the U.S. government, including covert operations involving big tech companies. She highlights how Zappo and PayPal are used as data warehouse points. What are your thoughts about Whitney's analysis? Share your thoughts and observations in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give this video a thumbs up. Thanks for watching.